Hello there, and welcome to the first official episode of Just Another Star Wars podcast. Today, we are going to be covering episode one, The Phantom Menace. I know episode one is not necessarily everybody's favorite, but I enjoy it. I think it's fun. So, throughout this series, I'm going to be discussing my opinions, what I noticed, the things that I enjoyed, what I didn't enjoy, um, and just give my outlook and thoughts on these movies and shows and books and even the video games. Because if it ties together, I'm going to talk about it. So, starting off with episode one, The Phantom Menace. Um, the one thing I started noticing right off the bat, and I'm sure a lot of you did too, Qui-Gon, he is the Jedi that everybody needs to be. He is so focused on helping other people alongside with, mastering his abilities as a Jedi. And the one thing that I picked up on um, is he always gives the best advice throughout this movie. It's very good life advice for really anybody, um, whether you're a Star Wars fan or not. It ties in pretty well. The first one that I noticed, and I'll mention this again because he has a few more, is that Obi-Wan is talking to him and he's saying, I'm feeling this in the Force, but I'm not sure what to make of it. And Qui-Gon is just like, look, you need to focus on the moment and don't let your anxieties overpower you from what you need to be doing right now. And then Obi-Wan is like, Master Yoda said I should be mindful of the future. He says something like, don't let your anxieties overpower you in the moment because you can't do anything about the future. You just need to live in the now. You need to focus on what you're doing. And when that time comes, then we'll face it and what the issue is. And with his ability, him being so focused on what's going on, he notices that there is a change in the Force, where he says he senses an unusual amount of fear coming from the Viceroy. And of course, he doesn't understand that they're kind of being manipulated and puppeted by Sidious and the Sith. Because as we all know, spoiler alert for a 25-year-old movie, we all know that Sidious, planning the entire Clone Wars, planning on one day defeating the Jedi. So, of course, he tries to kill him, but that doesn't happen. Going through it, there's a lot of like inconsistencies that I've seen. It just kind of makes me question, like, why did they use poisonous gas instead of using, like, for example, like cyanide or something like that to pour in their drinks? Because they send in the droid, TC-14, because obviously the Viceroy is scared shitless of these Jedi. I wonder why they didn't take the route of spiking their drinks or anything like that to try and kill them. But again, they're not the brightest creatures. And so, after the gas comes up and the droids come to the door is open, and the droid is like, check it out, Corporal, we'll cover you. And then the lightsabers ignite and they flip and start, chopping up together, chopping up the droids. And, but if I had $1 for every time I tried to recreate that scene with one of my older brothers, I feel like I'd be pretty rich. And correct me if I'm wrong. Aside from like Knights of the Old Republic and stuff like that, I don't believe we have ever seen uh, another instance where somebody uses force speed, except for in episode one. When the droidicas come and they can't handle it, they run away. But I feel like that is the only time we really ever see force speed ever being used by a Jedi, or really just by anybody, aside from the non-canon video games like KOTOR. But I'm not a big fan of that. I wish we could see it more. I think that's such a cool power, even if it's like just in little bits and pieces like we did with episode one. They don't need to use it all the time, but it'd be kind of cool to see, like, I don't know, Luke or even like Vader or something like that, just whip it around, you know? I think that'd be pretty cool to see in a fight. Qui-Gon has a lot of great quotes, and I'm sure we all use this to a lot of people, and we all think it about a lot of people that we meet. But the perfect line that Qui-Gon says is to Jar Jar when he says, "The ability to speak does not make you intelligent." And I can tell you right now that we are seeing that for sure in this world today. So I really like that. It's another good piece of advice for the world today. Now let me ask you all this. Has there ever been a time after seeing this movie, whether that was 25 years ago, like myself, or even today for the first time, did you ever dream of, jumping in a swimming pool or even being in a swimming pool and pretending to, use that breathing apparatus that they use to go down to the Gungan city and just, swim around and pretend that you're a Jedi going on a mission? Because again, if I had a dollar, I'd be rich. Now, when it comes to Boss Nass and the rest of the Gungans, I don't know. It's another thing where I'm like, why didn't they do this instead of this? I mean, and I would love all of your guys' opinions. And again, we're here to talk about this respectfully and be respectful for one another. Okay. But please leave me your comments. I would love to know what you guys think. I don't understand Qui-Gon using Force Persuade to get a speeder to leave and to convince Boss Nass to take Jar Jar. Now, why didn't he use that to convince him to help the Naboo? Why didn't he just go, the Naboo needs your help. You will help them. Instead of just trying to, I mean, Obi-Wan makes a good point where he says, you and the Naboo form an ambient circle where if one thing happens to one of you, it's going to happen to the other. So I'm kind of boggled why they just didn't force persuade him. Be like, look, go help these guys. They need you. You got a whole army here. But I'd love to know what you guys think. One of my favorite deleted scenes is when they come up from the water in the speeder. They let down the shield and Qui-Gon stands up and looks behind him. And in the deleted scene, they're heading towards a waterfall. And I honestly wish that they kept that in because that, in my opinion, that kind of gives it a little bit more of an action feel around this whole diplomacy era. Because as soon as they realize that they're about to go over, they shoot a zip line over and they start crossing the waters. And it's super intense. It's one of my favorite scenes. After that scene, when we meet the Queen for the first time, I didn't realize that the decoy was played by Keira Knightley, who, in fact, if you did not know, was around the age of 13, 14, if I remember correctly. And one of the best introductions in this movie is R2's, where, Jar Jar comes in and he's like, hello, boyos, and never goes, boo, 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 and, wakes up. And it's so funny to me if you think about it. And if you've seen, the Clone Wars series, episode 3, even episode 4 and 5, R2's kind of a savage. But I love the way, they're like, there's about 6 droids that go up and try and fix the ship after it gets hit. And it just cracks me up that one by one by one by one by one, all of them are now just destroyed. And R2's just still there working on the ship. And they clearly can't hit him. And he gets the ship fixed. But I think that's one of the best introductions. So when this movie came out in 1999, I was about 5 years old. So I was fairly young. I still remember going to the theater. For those who are slightly older than me, what was your experience when you found out that Jake Lloyd was playing young Darth Vader? Because in my head, if I had seen the original trilogy first, my head would be going crazy with different thoughts on, is he gonna show some dark side things where, he gets angry and you see his force powers, or, something like that. Like, do you see him kind of like in episode 2 where you see a slightly older Anakin kind of start going towards that when he killed like the Tusken Raiders. But let me know, what were your thoughts? I am very curious about that. And Anakin only being 9 years old, he is one of the smoothest talkers. Even if he's talking to a 14-year-old girl, at 9 years old, I wouldn't catch myself even going near a girl. I was doing my own thing at 9. But this kid, he's building pod racers. He's building all sorts of different things. He built C3PO in his bedroom. And now he's this suave little boy going, "Are you an angel? Because you're very pretty and you might be one." And in all honesty, that might not be a bad pickup line for nowadays. I love when we first meet C3PO. In my mind, Star Wars, I mean, it can be known as pretty much everyone bullying C3PO, especially R2D2. Even though they're very close, they're best of friends, it is hilarious to me that from the second that those two meet each other, R2's already giving him shit about not having any coverings on and just laughing at him because he looks naked. Cracks me up. And then again in episode 2, but we'll get there. He is so savage and so sassy, and I absolutely love it. Those who saw episode 1 as like a teenager or as an adult, what did you think about the line where Anakin says, "No one can kill a Jedi"? Because as we all know, it's very possible. Because again, not only do we see one of the most powerful Jedi, Qui-Gon Jinn, getting slain at the hands of Darth Maul, but the boy who also says no one can kill a Jedi ends up, you know, a lot of them. So I'm curious on what your guys' thoughts were when he said that line, "No one can kill a Jedi." There are a couple theories, um, and it seems like a lot of them, all of them, are non-canon, aside from one about Anakin being born through the Force. So we know in non-canon in Legends, um, in the book Darth Plagueis, we learn that Sidious actually manipulated the midichlorians within Shmi Skywalker to create Anakin. However, since that's now Legends and everything like that, I guess the only logical reason we have is that he is the chosen one, of course. He was born through the Force. I would love to know your guys' thoughts on your guys' favorite theories. I honestly like the one from Darth Plagueis myself, but we all know he is the chosen one. He is the one to bring balance. Going back to Anakin becoming Darth Vader, a lot of the things that young Anakin says in this movie kind of correlates with him, either being a Jedi or a Sith. In the scene where after they start up the pod racer and Qui-Gon is taking care of Anakin's cut on his arm, Anakin goes, "Is there a planet to every system?" And Qui-Gon says, "Most of them." And Anakin goes, "I'm going to be the first one to see them all." And I believe that he would be the first one to see them all, not only just as a Jedi Knight during the Clone Wars, but also during the Age of the Rebellion while he was Darth Vader going to different planets and, seizing power. So the next quote that I love from Qui-Gon, when he's talking to Anakin just before the race, and he looks at him and he says, "Concentrate on the moment. Feel, don't think. Use your instincts." And again, that's such good life advice because you want to go based off of how you feel. You want to go based off of, your knowledge, and you need to stay present within the moment. And don't really overthink things because, in the moment where like Anakin's spinning out of control and he's not attached and he's just going in circles, in that moment, if you're thinking or overthinking, things could go wrong. Very, very, very wrong. Of course, he did what he said. He used his instincts. He knew what to do. And of course, he won that race. I would love to see a what if episode of Qui-Gon not dying and becoming Anakin's master instead of Obi-Wan. I love Obi-Wan to death as his master. I think he's great. He is a little bit strong-headed, but I think Qui-Gon would have been perfect because he is level-headed. He doesn't take the BS from the council. I feel like he would really bring Anakin down, really level him out to where his emotions did not take over the place. Because again, in that instance where he says, feel, don't think, Anakin, as an older adult, kind of tends to overthink things. So I would love to see what would happen. And I've seen a lot of fan videos, which are great, but I would love to see an actual what if episode made by Disney and or Filoni. I would love to see what that would be like if he had survived and trained Anakin. And I think one thing we can see is, at the beginning of the race, Anakin's pod racer stalls. And I think at that time he's kind of overthinking. He's not exactly sure. He's kind of flustered because he wants to win the race, because he wants to help these people, but he's also lost in the past. He could also die. He could also get injured, But one of the funniest things is that, he does a couple switches, but I believe the one thing that made him stop moving was his parking brake. Because once he puts that lever down, he takes off. All of us, nowadays being on TikTok and, YouTube shorts and everything like that. One of my favorite videos is this girl saying, tell me a better sound than this. And then she shakes her coffee. And then it cuts to Sebulba and Anakin, flying through the canyons. And you can hear their engines and stuff. And honestly, that's a pretty great sound. I love that the first fight scene that we get with Darth Maul versus Qui-Gon. And if they didn't get rid of the deleted scenes, I feel like it would have helped a little bit better tell the reasons why and how they realized that Darth Maul was following them. But I find it really funny that Darth Maul was literally didn't give two shits about this kid. He was flying so fast and he wanted to run this kid down. And I feel like if Qui-Gon didn't tell him to drop, no Star Wars, no Darth Vader. I find it funny that he was willing to run this kid down, even if he didn't know him. He just wanted to get to this Jedi and kill this guy. After all of this happens, they get the ship fixed and they start heading off to Coruscant. Once they get there, they start talking, and it kind of caught me by surprise. But I find it very funny that Jar Jar's telling this to a 9-year-old that he finds Queen Amidala, or I guess Padme, that he finds her nice, but also attractive. I mean, there's got to be some boundaries there, Jar Jar. He's 9. I think he understands that she's pretty. So there's a lot of controversy of why the council did not want to train Anakin. And as I've learned and studied and watched these movies over and over again, I'm not surprised that they were scared. He had a lot going on. He was already past the age of training. Their fear was legitimate because them being on the High Council, of course, they have these crazy powers. Yoda being one of them, being around for 800 years at that point, maybe just a little over 800 years at that point. He's seen a lot. I understand their fear because he's gone away from his mom, who he has built a connection with. He grew up in a poor environment being a slave and being demanded of things of him without question. And so kind of being in that position again where, they have these higher ups being like, you can't do this, you need to do this and this and this. I feel like that was kind of his push to the dark side. And I feel like that is very justified in the council's part where they didn't want to train him. Because if I saw his anger within inside of him and his fear and his hate for what was going on, I understand why they didn't want to train him. Because who wants to train somebody to have these powers, regardless of how many midichlorians are in his blood? Who would want to train someone to have these powers and ultimately end up destroying the whole universe, which eventually happens? So, I mean, I understand their fear. I get it. Back to another Qui-Gon quote. This one is probably my favorite. And this is probably the best life advice that you can get from this movie. And it's when he's talking to Anakin, and Anakin's like, I don't want to be a problem, even though, later on he will be. And I've taken this in account to my own life. And I think it's very good advice. But Qui-Gon then says, focus determines your reality. I mean, you can take that with a grain of salt, but I believe that's the best advice anybody could give anybody. Because it's true. If you focus on one thing, you can do that one thing. You want to go to school, you focus on school, you get it done. You go to work, you focus on work, you get it done. You make a podcast, you get it done. Regardless, you got to focus on what you want. So in the Battle of Naboo, it's so satisfying to me is when the transports roll up and all the droids come out in a row They kind of look like a carton of eggs, you know? They all drop down and then they hit the buttons and they all come up and they all become alive, essentially. Um, it's just so satisfying. So satisfying. I don't know about you guys, but a lot of people have, their own favorite ships within the Star Wars universe. Like I love the Jedi Starfighter from Episode 3. Those are pretty cool. I love the X-Wing, obviously. Millennium Falcon is also a great one. But one of my all-time favorites, sleekest one in my opinion, and that's also jumping all the way to Mandalorian, is the N1 Naboo Starfighter. It's so sleek. It looks so clean. And I mean, even seeing it being rebuilt in the Mandalorian series, you know that it's a very, very quick and powerful ship. But I'd like to know what you guys love, what ships you like. And it's funny to me, just before the battle in Naboo starts, Boss Nass is talking to Jar Jar and he's like, "You've done well for the Gungans," which is really funny considering he was willing to throw him in prison for the rest of his life. But I find it funny that he just immediately changes his mind, being like, "Look, you guys, you brought everybody together. You did all this good stuff. And regardless of who you are, we want to put you in charge of this grand royal army." And it just makes me laugh because he is very clumsy. He's not the brightest, and he's just this goofy character. And as the general, you do see a lot of that clumsiness during the battle. When he gets his foot stuck in the droid and he's like trying to get it off, but it's short circuiting. So the droid is firing the gun and he's taking out all these droids just being clumsy. So he's kind of using his power, I guess, to his advantage. I remember being in the theater back in '99 and everybody freaking out when Darth Maul ignited both of his lightsabers. It's one of the best openings ever. Seeing those doors open, him raising his head, taking off the hood and the cloak, and then seeing the second blade ignite. So awesome. I have one I have one little complaint about that, about the beginning part. So Darth Maul ignites his lightsabers, Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon ignite theirs. Qui-Gon immediately goes for him. They start fighting, but Obi-Wan jumps over Darth Maul. And if you pay attention closely, he's not fighting Darth Maul. He is just swinging his lightsaber in the air until he hits the bottom blade. So my question is, George, if you're listening, why did you put that in there? Because in that instance, Obi-Wan could have just flipped over and stabbed him right then and there, and then it would have been over. Qui-Gon would have survived. Maybe you could use that for the What If episode. What do you think they should have done instead of having him flip over and fight the air? A little ridiculous, but really funny. And I remember back in the day, especially when this movie released on DVD or even VHS at the time, I remember watching the fight scene of Obi-Wan and Darth Maul and Qui-Gon, and me and my brothers would be in our basement with broomsticks with a stick from the outside, and one of us would be Qui-Gon, one of us would be Darth Maul, one of us would be Obi-Wan, and we would sit down and recreate that exact scene, trying to get it right. It's one of the best childhood memories of my life, recreating those scenes with my brothers. And the scene where Obi-Wan jumps from platform to platform using force jump, we did a lot of recreating of that as well. When I was a child, we used to have this platform in our backyard, and we would put our tramp next to it. And me and my brothers would recreate those scenes, and we would use the tramp to act like Obi-Wan and jump from the trampoline to the platform and, ignite the lightsaber and then continue to fight. It was just a lot of fun growing up in those days. It was just a blast. One of my favorite Qui-Gon moments is when they're fighting and then the ray shields pop up and Qui-Gon and Darth Maul are next to each other and Obi-Wan's in the back. And one of my favorite things to see is Qui-Gon kneeling and meditating because he's trying to keep his composure. He's trying to stay in the moment. He's using the force to, help him somehow, because Obi-Wan's in the back and he's ready. He's like, these things need to open because I'm going to kill this guy. Whereas Qui-Gon is like, you need to stay focused. You need to be in the moment. whatever happens, happens, and the Force will be with me. Unfortunately, he falls to his demise. And I think at that point, we do see a little bit of course, as anybody would feel being around someone for so many years, watching them die would be very hard, especially if you were facing that attacker right on. But in my opinion, Obi-Wan shows a lot of strength in not going crazy and just slashing and trying to kill him. But then, of course, he realizes that Darth Maul's a little bit more powerful and he gets knocked down. And I don't know if who else has noticed this, but one particular scene that I find hilarious, no matter how old I am, you see the Queen and Captain Panaka capture the Viceroy, and they say it's now time to discuss a new treaty. I find it really funny that when the decoy shows up and he goes after her, go get her. At one point, one droid gets shot down, and you see him get knocked down, but the droid right behind him trips over him. He doesn't get shot, he trips. So I'm glad that they put that in. So I'm sure everybody's got their own favorite, Jedi hilt that they love. My number one choice has always been Obi-Wan Kenobi's from episode 1 and 2. I just find it super slick. I think it looks so good. I love Qui-Gon's too, but Obi-Wan's is my all-time favorite. I'd love to hear your guys' opinion on your favorite guys' Jedi hilt. Or even Sith hilt. Like Darth Maul's, awesome. Sidious, his is so nice looking, and I wish I had one. So not only does Jar Jar have his clumsy moments that kind of benefit him during the war, uh, with the wires being attached, shooting those droids down, or even accidentally uh, uh, opening the backside to that cart holding the Boombas, the large ones, and it destroys all those tanks. Definitely luck. I feel like it's the same thing for Anakin. Anakin gets into a starship. He doesn't know anything about this starship. Yes, he may be a good pilot on the ground, but this is way different. So he's figuring stuff out. And I think it's funny that regardless of what they do, they are always so lucky. Anakin flies through the control ship and gets stranded and then ends up blowing up the entire thing from the inside. Granted, that's probably not the way to do it in war, even though this is an invasion, but I find them to be very, very, very lucky. I discovered a little while ago that the reason Obi-Wan was able to be successful over Darth Maul is because he was able to channel a part of the dark side that isn't necessarily okay to use. He channeled this side, which is what he was able to do to pull himself up. The thing that was not really allowed was the way he killed him, was by slashing him in half. And from what I understand, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I understand is that it's very frowned upon, and it's really only a technique that they use for like droids, but never really any type of humanoid creature. It's more inhumane in the Jedi's eyes to do that. So a while ago, I had just finished the book Padawan, um, which goes into uh, a young Obi-Wan's life, and he goes through this whole ordeal. It's a great book. It's a great read. If you haven't listened to it, if you haven't read it, please do. It's a great book to read. But you see the relationship between Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, and you understand that Qui-Gon is teaching him certain things, and Obi-Wan learns that throughout his through the entirety of the book, realizing that what Qui-Gon is teaching him is the best way to handle certain things. And so, if you read that book and you understand their relationship, it's much harder to watch Qui-Gon die, because you understand that this man who has been teaching him since he was a kid, like he wanted to prove himself in the book. he wanted to he wanted Qui-Gon to know that he could keep up with him, that he could become a great Jedi. But it makes it so much more in depth of a feeling when it comes to Qui-Gon's death. And I recommend reading that book and rewatching episode 1 afterwards because you will feel differently. Now, Mr. Sidious, Daddy Palps, my guy. Going back to Legends and the Darth Plagueis book, I know it's not canon, but as you think of the prophecy and Anakin being born of the Force, you must understand that Palpatine also knew this. Being the mastermind behind everything, becoming Chancellor, starting the Clone Wars, having Sifo Dyas go to the cloners and, do all this crazy stuff. It all started here, where Palpatine says, "Young Skywalker, we will watch your career with interest," which he does and ends up manipulating him, and we all know what happens. Now, I don't know about you, but one of the aspects that I love about Star Wars is the way that they portray funerals. Yes, like in the Clone Wars, there are those that like they get buried in the temple. I wouldn't want that. If it were me, I would love to be stuck on a pile of sticks and lit on fire, like Qui-Gon, like Darth Vader. I think that would be so cool. How would you want to go out? Would you want to be buried in the temple, something like that, with a big ceremony, or would you want to, be placed on a bunch of rocks or sticks like Qui-Gon or Darth Vader, being set on fire? Because that's my pick. I think that'd be super dramatic. I think that would be super awesome. At the very end of the movie, this is the first time we ever hear of the rule of two. There is only a master and an apprentice. And we will get more into that when we reach Clone Wars, the TV series, because there's a lot of controversy going into that, being like Asajj was a Sith, Darth Maul was a Sith, he came back, Savage was his apprentice. You know, we'll get into that, but this is the first time we hear of it, um, and the question remained: who was killed, the apprentice or the master? After they say that line, the camera pans over to Palpatine, and he just has this smirk on his face, just like a small smirk, being like, my plan is coming together. You guys don't know what I'm doing. It's good. It's good stuff. But with, after the camera pans and he smirks, um, after you see Sidious smirk, my first question was, what is going through his head? He's like, finally, I was able to get rid of this guy who he was going to ruin my plan. He's the most level-headed Jedi, and he was going to teach the one person I need to complete my plan to not become a Sith. That's just my thought. What do you guys think he was thinking about? Because, there's so many things he could be thinking about, whether or not being like, hey, I need a new apprentice because this one's gone. Where do I find one? Because at this time, Dooku was still a Jedi. Um, this was just before he left the Order. Evan Peel, we get to see him in live action for the first time. We get to see him for the first time ever. And we also get to see Deva Balipa, who, if you haven't seen the first season of Bad Batch or Rebels, you know that she is the master to Caleb Dune, aka Kanan Jarrus. I remember that after episode 1 and episode 2 came out. Um, I remember in school, everybody was doing the Jedi braid. You know, um, it was a popular thing back then. Honestly, I wish I did it. I never did it. I didn't have the long hair to do it. But I was always jealous of those who had it because me being a huge Star Wars fan, I was like, man, I want to look like a Jedi. I just didn't have the patience to grow my hair out. You know, episode 1, The Phantom Menace, man. I know a lot of people hated it. I know a lot of people still hate the prequels. But yes, there are little inconsistencies and some things that probably don't belong in there, but I love this movie, man. I love the prequels. I love the sequels. I love the original trilogy. Star Wars is huge. Star Wars is, in my opinion, it's like a religion. But also when it comes to that, it comes with a lot of hate. And that's okay, because a lot of people have their opinions and they are entitled to their opinions. But I believe in the aspect that this is something that everybody loves and that it's becoming a bigger thing more and more and more. I think we need to go at this more respectfully. Even though we have our own opinions, we don't need to judge other people on their opinions. I mean, it's a franchise, people. Okay? We need to understand that. And we need to understand that this is something that can bring us all together and something to love and that we can all enjoy. So, if you would join me and respectfully come and share your opinion, please tell me your thoughts on this first movie and what you love about it, and particularly what you might not like about it. But let's go out this saga and this series and this new channel with respect and love of the franchise together. Thank you for joining me today in discussing Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. May the Force be with you.